The blind elder staggered toward the edge of the cliff, his staff probing the treacherous ground. Behind him, the crowd roared like a storm-tossed sea. "Banished! Banished!" they shouted, as the old Skald raised his weathered face to the gray sky. His voice, once celebrated in mead halls, now rose in a final lament. "Odin, receive my truth that men fear to hear." Then, with surprising dignity, he stepped forward, disappearing into the mist that embraced the abyss. Thank you for joining us in this journey into the echoes of Viking truths and ancient courage. This channel is just beginning, and every subscription is a vital step toward reaching our first 1,000 watchers. If this story stirs something in you, please consider subscribing and sharing where you're watching from. Your support breathes life into these tales, keeping the spirit of the Skald alive. The fire's warm glow flickered against the dark timber walls of Ravnholm's great hall, casting long shadows that danced upon the rough-hewn benches and sturdy beams. Outside, a biting wind howled through the ancient pines that crowded the frozen landscape, their skeletal branches scratching at the gray sky like desperate fingers. Ice clung stubbornly to the edges of the fjord below, where the restless sea murmured its endless song against jagged rocks. The scent of burning pine mingled with the sharp tang of spilled mead and the faint, musky odor of damp woolen cloaks. Within this fortress of wood and stone, life pressed on, stubbornly defiant against the cruel winter. At the heart of the hall sat Torvald Halti, known among his people as Eyes of the Mist, a name earned not for clarity of sight, but for the piercing insight his blindness had sharpened. His 72 winters had bent his back and silvered his hair, yet in the firelight there remained a fire in his depthless eyes, now covered by milky veils. His skin, pale and furrowed, bore the map of years etched by hardship and wisdom. His long hair, white as the first snow, fell in tangled waves to his shoulders, caught now and then by thin braids threaded with worn beads of bone and amber. His beard was kept neat despite the weight of time, framing a face marked by deep lines and the quiet dignity of a man who had lived among gods and men alike. He sat cross-legged near the hearth, fingers curling gently around the smooth surface of his ashwood staff, the gift of the gods when his sight was stolen by the fates 15 winters past. The staff was carved with ancient runes, symbols of protection and revelation, some barely visible beneath the patina of age and countless journeys. At his side lay a worn leather pouch, heavy with carved bone runes. Each held secrets of skaldic prophecy and divine counsel. Around him, the great hall breathed with life. Children darted between tables, their breath misting in the cold air, laughter ringing sharp and clear like the crack of a spear against shield. Women moved with steady hands, pouring honeyed mead into carved wooden cups, their voices rising in song and tales of ancestors long past. Warriors, hardened by battle and tempered by frost, polished axes and sharpened blades, their faces grim and expectant. The air thrummed with the mounting anticipation of the coming blot, the great winter sacrifice, a sacred ritual to honor the gods and beseech their favor for the harsh months ahead. Torvald's mind wandered briefly beyond the warmth and noise. He remembered the dream that had haunted his sleep through the darkest hours of the previous night. In his vision, Odin's corvids circled ominously over a lifeless white wolf, its fur matted and stained with blood. Nearby, a serpent twisted in on itself, devouring its own tail in an eternal, hungry cycle. The dream's meaning pressed against his soul like the chill wind outside, heavy with warning and sorrow. The Skald's heart tightened with a weight that no fire could thaw. He was the keeper of stories, the voice of ancestors, the interpreter of signs that lay hidden in the whispers of nature, the shape of the stars, and the riddles of fate. But this night, the gods had revealed a truth that shattered the fragile peace of Ravnholm, a truth no one dared to speak aloud. Old Torvald, A voice slurred from the back of the hall. A young warrior, eyes glazed with mead and bravado. Tell us again of the great battle at Kattegat. Speak the words that make the brave tremble. The warriors around him roared in agreement, forming a loose ring, eager for the Skald's voice to weave legends into the night. Torvald's lips curled in a faint smile, his breath warm against the cold air as he recalled the stories. Yet beneath the surface, his spirit was troubled. The truth he carried was a shadow beneath the firelight, ready to consume all who heard it. Before he could respond, the heavy oak door to the hall was thrown open by a gust of frigid air, sending a cascade of snowflakes swirling in behind. The hall stilled as Hakon Vidkundsen entered, his presence imposing and taut with menace. The Jarl's cloak of black wolf fur billowed behind him, the scent of earth and iron clinging to his skin. His fiery red hair was slicked back, braided tightly along the crown of his head, and the scars that marred his neck and arms gleamed faintly in the firelight. His green eyes burned with a cold intensity, sharp as the blade at his hip. The murmurs ceased as he strode forward, his heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor. His voice, deep and commanding, rolled through the hall like thunder. Skald. Torvald felt the weight of every gaze upon him as Hakon's hard eyes settled. The Jarl's words came clipped and demanding. Did the gods send you a word of favor for our raid against the Franks? Every muscle in Torvald's body tensed. The moment he had dreaded, the moment fate had woven into the strands of his life, was upon him. The hall held its breath. I walked with the gods through the veil of night, Torvald began, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. And what I saw was no blessing, but a shadow cast by betrayal. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. Some leaned closer, others exchanged nervous glances. The bravado of the warriors faltered. Even the flames seemed to flicker uncertainly. What do you mean? Hakon's voice sharpened, a knife unsheathed beneath his words. Speak plainly, old man, or hold your tongue and spare us your riddles. Torvald rose slowly, leaning on his staff, his pale eyes piercing the dim light. The gods showed me the poison that courses not from our enemies, but from within, from the hand that sits upon the throne, stained with the blood of the fallen Jarl. A gasp escaped the lips of many. Hakon's face contorted with rage, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his sword. You speak treason, he spat. You would see me fall with lies? Torvald's voice rang clear. I saw the cup your hand filled with venom. I saw the rightful heir flee into the forests, her life spared by courage alone. And I see the ruin you would bring upon us all. The hall was plunged into a silence so thick it pressed against the walls. The children ceased their play, the women stilled their hands, and the warriors' eyes narrowed, searching, questioning. None dared speak, not against the Jarl, nor in defense of the blind Skald whose words bore the weight of gods themselves. Hakon's lips twisted into a cold smile, but his eyes betrayed the storm within. Bind him, he commanded, voice low and dangerous. At dawn, we will speak of his fate. Rough hands seized Torvald, their grip firm but not cruel. As he was led away, a soft touch brushed against his palm, a small carved rune, the symbol of Ansuz, messenger of truth and divine guidance. His fingers closed gently around it. The touch was familiar, the presence comforting. Freya, he breathed, recognizing the voice that whispered like a breeze through pine boughs. Hidden in the shadows beyond the hall, the healer watched with eyes like molten amber, heart pounding beneath her gray-blue cloak. Freya Gunhild's daughter, her Celtic heritage marked faintly in her pale skin, and the Yggdrasil tattoo curling beneath her wrist, moved silently. She had long been a secret ally to Sigrid Thorisdottir, the rightful heir who now hid among the forest's embrace with those loyal to her cause. Torvald was taken to a small, dim cabin near the edge of the village. The faint scent of herbs and earth lingered in the air, mingling with the cold breath of winter. The walls creaked softly. At the first light, Torvald was dragged before the clamor of the thing, the great assembly of clan and kin. The bitter cold bit through his cloak as eyes both fierce and fearful bored into him. Hakon, swollen from last night's drink, slouched in the high chair, a figure of arrogance and concealed dread. Torvald Halti, the Jarl's voice boomed. You stand accused of blasphemy and treason. What say you to these charges? The Skald's voice rose, clear and unwavering, carrying over the breathless crowd. I call upon the gods to judge us all. Let Odin's will be done. Murmurs rippled through the gathering. The ancient ritual of divine judgment was sacred, a trial beyond mortal authority. None questioned it, for fear and reverence alike. Hakon smirked, his confidence a masquerade. So be it. What challenge do you propose, old man? Lead me to the cliff of Ravnum. Torvald replied, voice steady. If I fall and perish, the truth dies with me. But if the ravens save me, as they once did Odin in his quest for wisdom, then know my words hold the weight of the gods. The crowd stirred uneasily. Some faces betrayed doubt, others a flicker of hope. The procession moved up the winding path that carved through the forest's edge, the world growing colder and more raw. Snow crunched beneath boots, the scent of pine and salt thickening as they neared the sacred precipice. The cliff jutted boldly over the roaring sea, a place steeped in legend, the very place where Odin was said to have hung, pierced and unbowed, seeking the knowledge of runes. Torvald paused, feeling the fierce gusts whip through his white hair, carrying the wild song of the ocean below. The abyss yawned before him, dark and endless, a mirror of the unknown paths that lay ahead. Hakon's voice broke the wind. Any last words, Skald? A prophecy, came the measured reply. Before the moon changes her face, the white wolf will return to the hall of his fathers, and the serpent will consume its own venom. Then, with resolute grace, Torvald stepped forward into the mist that curled like smoke around the ragged rocks. The crowd held its breath as he moved toward the edge, arms raised in a silent invocation. Odin, receive my truth that men fear to hear. And then he vanished. For a moment, stunned silence reigned. Then the sky erupted with the beating of wings. Dozens of black corvids, their eyes gleaming like embers, swirled in a dark storm above the cliff. The ravens circled where the Skald had disappeared, a living omen of divine will. A sign, shouted a voice from the crowd. The ravens of Odin. Hakon's face drained of color, his bravado shattered like brittle ice. Amid the clamoring warriors and whispered fears, few noticed the small boat slipping silently from the shadowed shore, carrying Torvald and the shadowed figure of Freya away from the eyes of men. The corvids followed, guardians of truth beyond mortal bounds. Outside the reach of betrayal and death, a new chapter was beginning, one written in silence and shadows, in truth and courage beyond the gaze of mortal kings. The frozen wind whispered cruel secrets as Torvald sat alone in the dim cabin, the flickering candle casting long, trembling shadows against the rough timber walls. His hands, though gnarled and worn, trembled not from age but from the weight of the truth he bore. Outside, the world lay silent beneath a heavy blanket of snow, its coldness a mirror to the chill that had settled deep within his chest. The fire sputtered feebly, as if reluctant to burn away the darkness that clung stubbornly to his spirit. He listened intently to the faint breaths around him, breaths that came soft and steady, yet spoke volumes in their quiet persistence. Sigrid was gone now, slipped away like a shadow into the forest, her resolve burning brighter than any flame. But in her place, something fragile and trembling had found its way into his refuge, a presence both unexpected and unsettling. The door creaked softly, and a small figure stepped through the threshold, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperation. A girl no older than 12 winters, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her clothes threadbare and soaked from the relentless snow. Her hair, a wild tangle of golden strands, hung limp and streaked with grime. She carried no weapon, no shield, only the thin cloak that barely protected her from the bitter air and the weight of silent terror. Torvald's heart clenched as the child hesitated at the entrance, glancing nervously behind her as if chased by invisible shadows. His mind raced. Who was she? Another victim of the chaos that churned beyond these walls. A lost soul cast adrift by the Jarl's ruthless grasp? Come, he said gently, his voice a rasp that still held echoes of authority. You are safe here for now. She stepped inside with cautious steps, shivering as the warmth of the fire reached her pale skin. Her eyes darted to the old man, searching for something. Hope, mercy, understanding. And in that glance, Torvald saw a reflection of his own plight, a life imperiled by forces greater than either could face alone. Who are you, child? He asked, reaching out a hand that trembled as it hovered near her shoulder. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. Ira Bjorn's daughter. His face softened. The name was familiar, a daughter of the smith, if the whispers in the village held truth. But what had brought her here, to this place of exile and shadow? My home. It was burned, she confessed, her words breaking like fragile ice. The men came in the night, Hakon's men. They took everything. Father, he tried to fight, but they were too many. I ran, but I have nowhere to go. The truth hit Torvald with the force of a winter storm. The Jarl's cruelty had reached even the smallest corners of Ravenholm, leaving ruin and despair in its wake. And in this small, trembling girl, he saw the living testament to the suffering wrought by tyranny. A deep ache settled in his chest, mingling with the resolve that had carried him through decades of hardship. To turn her away would be to betray everything he stood for, his duty as Skald, as guardian of stories and protector of the weak. Yet harboring her meant danger, risk not only to himself, but to those who still dared to stand against the Jarl's growing shadow. The flicker of doubt passed through his mind like a fleeting shadow, but it was swept away by the stronger tide of compassion. You are not alone, Ira, he said firmly, guiding her nearer to the fire. The gods watch unseen, and so do I. We will find a way. Her lips quivered, tears threatening to spill, but she nodded, clinging to the old Skald's words like a lifeline. For a moment, the weight of fear eased, replaced by a fragile thread of hope. Yet, as the candle guttered and the wind howled outside, Torvald knew that this fragile sanctuary was but a brief respite. The Jarl's reach was long and merciless. Any act of kindness was a spark in the dark, small, yet dangerous. But a spark could ignite a blaze. Why did you come to me? He asked quietly, curious despite the urgency. Ira hesitated, stealing a glance toward the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. I heard stories. About you. About the Skald who speaks with the gods. I thought, maybe you could help. Torvald's eyes closed briefly, the words stirring memories of a time when his voice carried across halls and battlefields, when his stories shaped the fate of men and clans. Now, his sightless eyes saw more clearly than ever the fragile threads of loyalty and fear that bound this land. You came seeking truth, he murmured, and truth you shall have. But beware, child. The path of truth is perilous. It demands sacrifice. She nodded, determination hardening her youthful features. I do not fear the Jarl. I fear what will become of us if no one stands. The old Skald's breath hitched at the fierce courage of this young soul. In her, he sensed the flicker of Sigurd's spirit, unyielding and resolute, but still vulnerable. The weight of his own years bore down upon him. Could he protect her? Could he shield the last embers of hope from the storm? His mind spun, weighing the dangers of harboring her against the moral imperative that gnawed at his conscience. To deny aid would be to betray the very essence of honor that his people revered. To accept her was to invite peril, not just upon himself, but upon. Torvald rose painfully, the years in his joints reminding him of the toll ahead. He looked down at Ira, small, brave, and trembling, and made a decision that would ripple beyond this night. "You will not face this alone," he promised. "We will move at first light. To the forest, to those who still believe in justice. But you must trust me completely." Her answer was a solemn nod, the courage of the young kindling like embers in the cold night. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the distant caw of ravens, a reminder that even in darkness, the watchful eyes of the gods never slept. Torvald's gaze lifted to the heavy sky, the weight of fate settling upon his shoulders like a mantle. In choosing to protect the vulnerable, he had thrown down a gauntlet against the tide of cruelty and silence. The path ahead was treacherous, lined with shadows and peril. But within the fragile threads of trust and hope, a spark ignited, a promise that truth, however forbidden, would not be silenced. And so, as night gave way to the pale light of dawn, the blind Skald and the child named Ira prepared to step into the storm together, bound by fate, honor, and the unyielding call of the gods. The cabin lay hidden beneath heavy boughs of spruce and fir, nestled deep within the embrace of the forest's oldest shadows. Its walls, crafted from stout timbers hewn long ago, bore the scars of countless winters, darkened by soot, streaked with moss, and softened by the slow wear of time. The small window, shuttered against the biting cold, let in only a muted light that mingled with the flickering dance of the hearth's flame. The scent of burning spruce needles curled upward in gentle ribbons, mingling with the earthiness of damp wood and the faint trace of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Torvald moved slowly, each step deliberate and careful, the weight of his age and blindness etched into the careful placement of his staff. Yet beneath the cautious gait was a steadiness born of years walking through darkness, both literal and the murky shadows of human hearts. Behind him, Ira followed, clutching her thin cloak tightly, eyes wide and alert as they adjusted to the dim warmth of the cabin's interior. The old Skald reached the hearth first, feeling the heat wash over his face like a balm. His hands, gnarled and marked with the faint scars of old wounds, moved to stoke the fire, coaxing the flames higher with practiced ease. The crackling blaze cast long, flickering shadows that stretched and shifted like restless spirits across the rough wooden walls. Ira hesitated at the threshold, the chill still clinging stubbornly to her skin. She shivered once, wrapping her arms around herself, the thinness of her cloak no barrier against the penetrating cold. Torvald turned, guided by the soft sound of her movement, and reached out a steady hand. "You must sit," he murmured, voice low and steady, "and warm yourself by the fire. It is no place for weak bones to tremble." Her lips parted, a ghost of a smile flickering before retreating like a timid bird. She obeyed, settling on a rough bench near the hearth, her gaze flickering to the old man as if searching for reassurance. The flickering light revealed the faintest traces of dirt and bruises on her pale skin, the sheen of cold sweat on her brow. Torvald's fingers moved with gentle certainty as he reached into the leather pouch at his side. From it, he drew a small piece of bread, dense, hearty, baked with coarse grains, and a bit of dried venison. He held the offerings out to her without words, the simple act carrying the weight of trust and care. Ira's hands, small and trembling, reached forward to accept the food. She bit hesitantly, chewing slowly as if afraid to consume too quickly. The warmth of the fire seemed to seep into her limbs, easing the rigidity of fear and exhaustion that had taken root after the long night. "Rest," Torvald urged softly. "Your journey has been hard, and the cold will claim what little strength remains if not tended." She nodded once, eyes lowered, and for a moment the cabin held a fragile stillness. Outside, the wind howled low and mournful, But within this wooden cradle, a quiet sanctuary blossomed. Torvald's gaze drifted to her hands, delicate but marked by subtle signs of resilience. A faint callus at the base of her thumb, the thin line of a scar along her wrist, barely visible beneath the sleeve. These were the hands of one who had struggled, who had fought to survive in a world often cruel and unforgiving. "You carry more than cold with you," he said, voice gentle but firm. "Tell me, child, who are you truly? What weighs upon your heart?" Ira's eyes met his, glinting with the flicker of ember light, a mixture of innocence and a hard-earned resolve. She hesitated, then with a breath that seemed to gather courage from the stillness, she spoke. "My name is Ira," she whispered, her voice fragile yet steady. "Jorn's daughter. My family, they are gone now. The smith's forge silenced by fire and steel. I escaped with nothing but my life." A shadow passed across Torvald's face, the sorrow of so many lost stories etched deep into his heart. He nodded slowly, the weight of her pain settling beside his own. "You are safe here," he promised, "for as long as I draw breath and the gods watch over us. This place is old, but it holds secrets and protections." For a few long moments, they simply sat together, the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of wolves the only sounds threading the silence. Between them, words were unnecessary. The shared understanding spoke louder than speech. Torvald reached out, his weathered fingers tracing a careful path along Ira's arm, seeking the small bundle tied beneath her cloak. She stiffened momentarily, then relaxed when he drew forth a worn leather pouch, knotted tightly with sinew. From within, he pulled a folded strip of cloth, stained with dirt but carefully folded, a fragment of a woven brooch, silver and etched with the symbol of a white wolf. The craftsmanship was crude but meaningful, a token of lineage and loyalty. "You carry your house's mark," Torvald observed. "The emblem of the Thoris daughters, is it not?" Ira nodded, lips pressed tight. "My mother gave it to me. Before the night." Her breath hitched, a shadow of grief passing behind her eyes. Torvald's heart clenched. The sign was more than a keepsake. It was a spark of hope, a silent vow to reclaim what was lost. The old Skald leaned closer, voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "You bear the blood of warriors and kings. But the path ahead is treacherous. You must learn patience, for strength alone will not win this fight." Ira's gaze sharpened, the firelight igniting the fierce determination that lay beneath her fragile exterior. In the corner, a bundle of herbs hung suspended from a wooden peg, dried juniper, yarrow, and a sprig of heather. Torvald rose and moved toward the small table cluttered with pots and bone tools, selecting a jar of thick salve. He returned and knelt beside Ira, gently rolling back the cuff of her sleeve to reveal a shallow but ragged scratch across her forearm. The wound was red and swollen, a cruel reminder of the harsh journey. "Let me," he said softly. With careful fingers, he applied the salve, murmuring old words of healing taught by the wise women of his youth. The scent of herbs filled the small space, a mixture of pine, earth, and something faintly sweet, like the breath of spring after a long winter. Ira's eyes fluttered closed, the tension draining from her face as the pain eased beneath the touch. When she opened them again, they held a glimmer of gratitude, silent and unspoken. Torvald smiled faintly, the corners of his lips trembling with the weight of unspoken promises. "You are not alone." As night deepened beyond the cabin's walls, the old Skald moved to prepare a rough bed near the hearth, straw-lined with furs, thick and warm against the cold floor. Ira settled there, the small bundle of Wolf's emblem pressed to her chest. Torvald remained seated nearby, his staff resting against the wall, eyes closed as he breathed in the rhythm of the fire and the quiet presence beside him. The veil between worlds seemed thin in moments like these, where mortal pain and divine whisper intertwined. Outside, the sky darkened further, stars blinking cold and distant through the lattice of branches. The wind's mournful song. In the days that followed the Skald's near-sacrificial plunge from the cliff, the village had descended into a restless silence. The once vibrant hall now sat shrouded in shadows, its beams empty of laughter and song. Men and women shuffled through their duties with eyes darting nervously toward the forests or the looming mountains beyond, where the Skald and his small band had fled. Fear, suspicion, and grief coiled tightly around their hearts. Hakon Vidkunsen's death, still fresh and unspoken in many quarters, cast a pall that stretched beyond Ravnholm. The Jarl's loyalists, scattered and leaderless, were frantic, their loyalty fractured. The rightful heir, Sigrid Thorisdottir, had swiftly claimed the throne, but her hold was tenuous, marred by whispers of rebellion and the ever-watchful eyes of rival clans eager to exploit the turmoil. Torvald, from his hidden cabin beneath the heavy boughs, felt the weight of the world pressing in. Though his eyes could no longer pierce the darkness of the forest, his other senses sharpened with the growing threat. The soft crunch of snow under heavy boots, the distant murmur of voices carried on the wind. Each sound was a heartbeat, a warning. The god's silence on these omens was a heavy one. Freya, ever vigilant and steady, moved silently beside him, her amber eyes reflecting a calm born from years of surviving the fragile boundary between life and death. She gathered herbs and prepared poultices, tending not only to wounds of flesh but also to the fragile spirits they sheltered. One evening, as twilight bled softly into night, Torvald sat by the hearth, fingers tracing the worn edges of his rune pouch. The firelight flickered against the cabin's walls, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and writhe like restless spirits. A sharp rap at the wooden door shattered the fragile stillness. "Stay close," Torvald whispered, his voice a low rumble beneath the crackling fire. Freya nodded, her expression hardening as she moved toward the door. The cold wind crept in as she unlatched the wooden bar and pulled open the portal to the dark. Two figures stood shrouded in cloaks heavy with frost, faces obscured by hoods. The taller of the two stepped forward, lowering his hood to reveal a face scarred by sun and battle, a hunter known across the region for his hard eyes and sharper blade. "We seek the Skald," the man said, voice rough like gravel. "Word in the north says he lives yet. The clans demand answers." Torvald's heart tightened. The fragile peace they had built was cracking. Protecting the truth and those who carried it was becoming a dangerous gamble. Freya's voice was steady as she answered, "This cabin is a place of healing, not war. No harm will come to those who enter with respect." The hunter's eyes narrowed, suspicion cutting through the dim warmth. "Respect is earned, healer. The clans are restless. They hunger for justice, or vengeance." Torvald rose slowly, steadying himself with the weight of his staff. "Justice is not always swift," he said, voice calm but resolute. "Nor is vengeance the path of wisdom." The hunter's gaze flicked toward the old man's pale, sightless eyes. "You speak like one who walks with the gods." "I am their servant," Torvald replied, "and the truth I carry is heavier than any sword." A tense silence fell. The second figure, a younger man with wary eyes, stepped forward. "If he lives, the clans must know. The Jarl's death has left a wound that bleeds into every hearth and heart. We cannot abide shadows and secrets." Torvald's mind raced. To reveal himself would be to invite the swift and brutal justice of men who feared the unknown. Yet hiding only delayed the reckoning and endangered those who had placed their trust in him. "I ask for time," Torvald said finally. "Time to speak with the rightful heir, to restore balance without bloodshed." The hunter studied the old Skald a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Time is a precious thing in these times, but it is short." With that, the two men withdrew into the night, their footsteps swallowed by the vast silence of the forest. As the door closed, Freya moved to Torvald's side, her hand brushing his arm. They will tell others. The clans will come. We must prepare. Torvald nodded, the weight of his years settling like a shroud. Then we will meet them not with fear, but with the truth. The gods do not forsake those who honor their word. Outside, the wind howled through the branches like a chorus of lost souls, carrying with it the promise of a coming storm. Days blurred into nights as a slow tide of visitors pressed closer. Scouts from distant clans arrived under the guise of traders and messengers, their keen eyes searching, their questions veiled threats. Tales of Torvald's survival and the legend of his divine trial spread, drawing both allies and enemies. Among those who entered the shadows of the forest was Gunnar Svensson, once a fierce warrior loyal to Hakon, now a man adrift in a sea of uncertainty. His hardened gaze betrayed the conflict within, a man torn between the lingering loyalty to a fallen jarl and the dawning realization of the truth that Torvald had spoken. Gunnar approached the cabin one cold morning, the frost stiffening his breath. He came not with sword drawn, but with a hesitant step, fingers brushing the worn hilt at his side. "Skald," he said gruffly, voice low, "the clans stir. Some call for war, others for peace. The path you choose will shape the fate of all." Torvald met his gaze steadily. "And what do you seek, Gunnar? Revenge for a dead jarl, or the restoration of honor?" The warrior's jaw clenched, eyes flickering with the ghost of old battles. "I seek the truth." A fragile bridge was formed in that moment, between the blind Skald, the warrior lost in shadows, and the fragile hope of a clan poised on the edge of chaos. Yet the danger only deepened. Reports came of rival tribes moving closer, drawn by opportunity and the scent of weakness. Sigrid, meanwhile, struggled to hold her claim, her forces stretched thin and her heart heavy with the burden of leadership. She knew the value of the Skald's wisdom, but the cost of harboring him could be her ruin. One evening, as Torvald sat by the fire, the cabin rocked with a sudden, violent pounding. The door splintered under heavy blows. Outside, the sharp voices of armed men cut through the darkness. "Open, Skald," a voice commanded. "The clans have decreed your presence a threat to their peace. Surrender or face their wrath." Torvald's breath caught, the air thick with the scent of smoke and steel. Freya moved swiftly, whispering a prayer beneath her breath, her fingers deftly reaching for hidden blades. But Torvald raised his hand, steady and commanding. "Wait." The cabin fell into a tense silence as the Skald's voice rose, carrying the authority of years steeped in wisdom. "To those who seek me with weapons drawn, know this: I bear no ill will, nor do I hide from justice. But truth is a flame that cannot be snuffed by the hand of fear." The pounding ceased, replaced by murmurs of uncertainty. A figure stepped forward, a young man with eyes bright and questioning. "Why do you hide in shadow, old man? What truths do you keep from the clans?" Torvald reached inward, drawing strength from the runes carved into his staff. "I hide not to escape, but to protect. The world outside is harsh, and the innocent must be shielded from the storm that brews." The men exchanged glances, the weight of the Skald's words settling upon them like a shroud. "It is not me you should fear," Torvald continued, voice softer now, "but the lies that poison our hearts and threaten to tear us apart." Slowly, the leader of the armed men lowered his weapon, the tension easing like the thawing of a frozen river. "We will speak with the rightful heir," he said. "But know this, Skald, your path is perilous. The gods watch, but men often act in darkness." Torvald nodded, the flicker of hope kindling within him. The battle for truth was not won by sword alone, but by the courage to face the shadows within and without. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, the old Skald felt the stirrings of change. The world outside might be unforgiving, but within this fragile sanctuary, the seeds of justice and renewal were being sown. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and sacrifice. Yet, Even as the cold wind whispered warnings through the pines, Torvald knew one thing with unwavering certainty. Torvald's ears, sharpened by years without sight, caught the faint crunch of heavy footsteps pressing through the snow. His heart tightened, the weight of years pressing upon his stooped shoulders with renewed force. The door shook beneath a sudden, violent pounding. Freya's fingers tightened around a small knife hidden beneath her cloak, but she did not speak. She waited for the Skald's command. Torvald rose slowly, leaning on his staff as the rapping grew urgent and insistent. He moved to the door, the cold biting at his worn hands as he pushed it open. Outside stood a group of armed men, their faces harsh and drawn, eyes searching with suspicion and unease. At their forefront was a man Torvald recognized, Gunnar Svensson. Once a loyal warrior to Hakon, now a man adrift, caught between the fading shadows of past loyalties and the flickering light of truth. Skald. Gunnar's voice was low but steady, edged with the uncertainty of a man who had glimpsed the abyss and hesitated. The clans have spoken. Your presence here stirs unrest. Many call for your arrest, some for your death. They say your words have shattered the peace. Torvald met the warrior's gaze, his unseeing eyes steady in the cold morning light. Peace built on lies is no peace at all. Truth is a flame that will not be quenched by fear or steel. Freya stepped forward, her voice calm and unwavering. We seek no war here, only the path to healing. The armed men shifted uneasily. Gunnar's gaze flicked toward the cabin's interior, where the faint scent of herbs and smoke mingled with the sharp winter air. The clans demand justice, not vengeance. What say you to the charges against you? That you slander the Jarl and incite rebellion. Torvald's voice rose, carrying the weight of gods and years of wisdom. I speak only what the gods revealed. The Jarl sits upon a throne stained with blood. His hand poisoned the cup of peace and cast the clan toward ruin. I have borne this truth not for glory, but for the hope of redemption. A murmur rippled through the gathered men. Gunnar's jaw tightened. You would see us all torn apart by your stories? No, Torvald replied gently, but I would see the lies lifted so that justice may find its place. The tension in the cold air thickened, the men's weapons shifting uneasily in their grasp. One stepped forward, a younger warrior with eyes sharp and wary. If you speak truth, Skald, then prove it. Stand before the clans, before the thing, and let them hear your words. Let the gods judge between us, as you once dared to demand. Torvald nodded slowly, the familiar weight of sacrifice heavy upon him. So be it. The gods do not turn from those who seek their favor with courage. Freya laid a steady hand on his arm. You will not face them alone. Outside, the snow began to fall softly, a quiet curtain settling over the land as the Skald and those who stood with him prepared to face the reckoning. The path to the thing was harsh and unforgiving, a climb through icy slopes and tangled woods, each step echoing the fragile heartbeat of a clan on the brink. As they emerged from the forest, the great clearing where the thing was held loomed before them, a circle of rugged stones etched with runes and worn by the footprints of generations. The clans had gathered, their numbers swelling beneath heavy cloaks of fur and leather, faces set hard with suspicion and simmering fury. Children clung to mothers' skirts. Warriors gripped weapons that gleamed dully beneath the gray sky. At the center, elevated upon a dais of rough-hewn timber, sat Hakon Vidkunsson's successor, Sigrid Thorsdottir. Her blue-gray eyes burned with determination, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of a sword not yet drawn. Her voice rang clear as she called out to the crowd, "Bring forth the Skald." Torvald stepped forward, guided by Freya and guarded by a small band of loyalists. The cold bit through his cloak, the weight of his years heavy in his bones, but his voice was firm as he addressed the gathered clans. I have come bearing the truth whispered to me by the gods themselves. The throne was stained with blood not of battle, but of treachery. The rightful heir was cast into shadow, and our people led toward ruin by a hand that wears the crown unjustly. A chorus of gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some faces twisted with anger, others with dawning realization. The tension was a living beast, coiled and dangerous. From the crowd, a voice called out, sharp and cutting, "Why should we believe the words of a blind old man? Where is the proof of your claims?" Torvald lifted his staff, the runes carved deep into it would seeming to glow faintly beneath the pale light. The proof lies not only in words, but in the God's own judgment. I survived their trial, saved by the ravens that carry their will. If you doubt, look to the signs around you. He gestured toward the darkening sky, where the first corvids began to gather, their black forms cutting stark against the gathering storm clouds. Sigrid stepped down from the dais, her voice steady and clear. "I stand with the Skald. My bloodline is the truth he defends. Together, we seek not vengeance, but justice for our clan." A ripple of support stirred among the clan's folk. Yet not all were convinced. A grizzled elder stepped forward, his voice rough with age and doubt. "Words are wind, young woman. What of the cost? Can we afford to unravel the order that holds us against the winter's bite?" Torvald's reply was soft but unwavering. "The cost of silence is far greater. To live under a shadow is to starve the soul of honor and truth. We must choose whether to live by fear or by courage." The crowd's murmur grew louder, weighed down by fear and the hunger for justice. Suddenly, a shout arose from the edge of the assembly, a faction loyal to the fallen Jarl, their faces hard with bitterness. "Traitor, you would tear us apart for the promises of a child and a blind man." Gunnar stepped forward, his hand raised to silence the uproar. "Enough. We must decide as one, or be shattered like broken shields in the storm." The thing grew chaotic, voices raised in accusation and defense, the fragile balance of peace teetering on the edge of collapse. Torvald felt the wind chill deeper, the scent of pine and cold blood thick in the air. Sigrid raised her arms, calling for silence. "Hear me, all of you. We are kin. Our strength lies not in the sword alone, but in the bonds that tie us to our land and each other. This trial is not just of one man, but of our future." Her eyes met Torvald's, a silent pact forged between the blind Skald and the rightful heir. Together, they faced the storm, two souls bound by truth, honor, and the fragile hope that even in darkness, the light could endure. The assembly's tension was broken by the slow approach of a figure none had expected, an old woman, draped in furs and bearing the marks of the forest's wisdom. Known as Hilda the Seeress, her eyes gleamed with the clarity of one who walks between worlds. She spoke in a voice that carried the weight of ancient rites. "The gods have not been silent. The ravens have flown. The truth is clear as the frozen stream. It is time to lay down old shadows and embrace the dawn." Her words rippled through the gathering like a sudden thaw, weaving threads of calm through the unrest. Torvald's heart stirred with cautious hope, but the path ahead remained perilous. The clans must choose, to embrace truth and risk upheaval, or cling to fear and the ruin it promised. As the day darkened toward dusk, the thing stood as a crucible, where justice, honor, and destiny would be forged in the fires of choice. And through it all, the blind Skald listened, not with his eyes, but with the unyielding spirit of one who had seen beyond mortal sight, carrying the burden and blessing of a truth only the gods dared to hold sacred. The pale light of dawn crept softly through the heavy canopy of fir and spruce, casting long, fragile shadows across the clearing where the clans had gathered. The air was thick with the cold bite of winter, yet beneath the frost lay a tension simmering with the weight of unspoken truths and fragile hopes. The vast circle of stones, weathered and ancient, bore silent witness to the unfolding fate of Ravnholm, a fate balanced precariously between vengeance and redemption. Within the heart of this assembly, Torvald Halti stood, a figure both frail and formidable. His white hair, the murmurs of the crowd swelled and ebbed like the restless sea below the cliffs. Faces marked by battle and hardship, by grief and hardened resolve, turned toward the blind Skald and the woman who stood with him. Some eyes burned with accusation, others shimmered with doubt and uncertainty. The past shadow loomed, dark and relentless, but the promise of a new dawn flickered in fragile embers. Torvald lifted his staff, the ancient runes carved deep into the freestone would catching the dim light. His voice, though weathered and soft, carried the undeniable strength of one who had carried the burden of truth through countless storms. Brothers and sisters of Ravenholm, he began, his words slow and deliberate. I have borne a heavy burden, one that has torn at the fabric of our kin. But know this, truth is not the enemy of peace. It is the flame that burns away the rot beneath. A hush fell, the gathering caught between the sharp edges of hope and the ache of betrayal. The long winter had hardened hearts, but it had also sharpened minds. Ira stepped forward then, small but unyielding. Her voice, trembling yet clear, broke through the silence. Skald saved me when the night was darkest. When the fire came and took my home, when men came to steal our lives, he gave me shelter. He gave me hope. Her words, simple and pure, rippled through the crowd. Faces softened, and a few nodded silently, the memory of suffering and survival weaving a thread of shared humanity. Gunnar Svensson, once a loyal warrior to the fallen Jarl, stepped from the edge of the assembly. His imposing frame was scarred and worn, but his gaze now held a new light, a clarity born of painful reckoning. I was blind to the truth, as many were, Gunnar admitted, his voice gruff but honest. I followed a man whose shadow stretched too far, whose ambition stained our land. But I have seen the courage of the Skald, the strength of Sigrid, and the hope in Ira's eyes. The path ahead is uncertain, but it must be walked with honor. Whispers spread like wildfire. The old warrior's words carried weight, a bridge across the chasm of doubt. Sigrid's voice rose, clear and unwavering. I stand not for vengeance, but for justice, for the honor of my father, for the lives lost to ambition and poison. I ask the clans not only to listen, but to choose. Will we be torn apart by shadows, or will we rise together? A grizzled elder, his beard white like the snow underfoot, stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he raised a gnarled staff. The gods watch us, and they see the pain in your eyes, Sigrid Thor's daughter. But the winters are harsh, and the enemies many. Can we afford to fracture our strength now? Does the blood spilled turn the tide, or drown us all? The question hung heavy in the air, the weight of generations pressing upon every soul. Torvald's breath was steady as he answered. The gods do not ask us to tread lightly when truth calls. To live in fear is to die slowly. But to embrace justice, even when painful, is to honor those who fell and those who yet live. The gathering grew still, the sound of the wind weaving through the stones the only witness to the fragile truce forming beneath the gray sky. Torvald turned his face slightly, feeling the cold bite of the wind against his skin. I have walked through darkness long enough. The truths I spoke were not meant to divide, but to heal. The poison in the throne has been revealed. Now, it is for the clans to bind the wounds with wisdom and courage. Sigrid stepped forward, her hand resting lightly on the haft of her sword. Let this gathering mark a new beginning. Let us honor the dead, restore the land, and rebuild our clans, not with the blade of vengeance, but with the strength of unity. From the crowd, a murmur of assent rose, tentative but growing. Faces once hardened by suspicion softened, the threads of kinship weaving anew. Ira, emboldened, lifted the silver brooch of the white wolf, holding it aloft. This is not just a token of blood, but a symbol of hope. For all who have suffered, and all who will fight to see the dawn. A few warriors stepped forward, casting aside weapons with slow, deliberate gestures, a silent pledge that the cycle of violence might finally be broken. The old seeress, Hilda, emerged from the shadows, her voice a low chant weaving through the air. Her eyes gleamed with ancient wisdom as she raised her hands toward the sky. The ravens have flown. The gods have spoken in silence and in storm. Let peace take root where truth is sown. The crowd bowed their heads, the weight of her words settling deep within their hearts. Torvald felt a warmth that was not of the fire in his chest, a quiet redemption rising amidst the cold. His staff, worn smooth by years and trials, seemed lighter in his grasp. Freya moved closer, her hand resting reassuringly on his arm. You have carried us through the darkest night, Torvald. Now, the dawn is ours to meet. The old Skald's lips curved in a faint smile, fragile but genuine. Though his sight was lost to the world of men, the vision in his heart was clearer than ever, the promise of renewal, born from sacrifice and truth. As the sun finally broke through the heavy clouds, casting golden shafts across the frost-covered clearing, the clans of Ravenholm found a fragile peace, a moment suspended between past pain and future hope. Torvald's voice, though softened with age, rang steady in the ears of those who would listen. May the gods guard our steps, and may the truth we embrace guide us beyond the shadows. And so they stood together, Skald, healer, warrior, and child, bound by the shattering and the mending of trust, carrying forward a legacy not of bloodshed, but of courage and the enduring power of truth. The winter winds still howled beyond the forests, but beneath the sheltering sky, the clans found a brief and precious peace, an ember glowing against the cold, a promise that even in exile and silence, the voice of the Skald would never truly fade. The days that followed the storm of the Thing's gathering were unlike any Ravenholm had known in decades. The snow lay thick and undisturbed, blanketing the land in a fragile silence that seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for what would come next. Within the village, a subtle shift had begun weaving its way through the people, like the first thaw after a long, merciless winter. The great hall, once heavy with suspicion and silence, now hummed with quiet purpose. The echoes of old grudges softened by the weight of shared truth, and the promise of renewal tempered the cold air. Torvald's absence was felt deeply, yet his story, his courage and sacrifice, had taken root in the hearts of the clan. The rune stone raised in his honor stood not far from the hall's entrance, its etched symbols catching the pale light, a solemn reminder that truth, even when banished, could never be buried. Sigrid Thorisdottir moved through the village with a steady grace, her presence both a balm and a beacon. The mantle of leadership was heavy, yet she bore it with a quiet resolve that inspired those around her. Her eyes, still sharp and watchful, carried the memory of exile and loss, but also the spark of hope rekindled by the Skald's final words. She had begun the work of healing, mending fractured alliances, tending to those wounded by war and betrayal, and rekindling the old bonds that had once made Ravenholm strong. Among the villagers, a new sense of cautious optimism took root. Warriors began to train not solely for war, but for the defense of their homes, standing vigilant, yet open to the possibility of peace. Women and children returned to the daily rhythms of life, their laughter tentatively filling the cold halls once more. The kitchens smelled of fresh bread and spiced mead, the hearth fires burning steadily through the long nights. Freya found herself woven deeper into the fabric of the community. Her healing hands, once hidden in the shadows, now tended openly to the sick and injured, her knowledge of herbs and ancient rites a gift cherished by all. Her bond with Sigrid and the memory of Torvald shaped her path. It was not just about mending flesh, but but about restoring spirits broken by fear and grief. One morning, as the pale sun broke through a fragile veil of mist, Freya stood outside the healer's hut, eyes scanning the horizon. His departure was quiet, unheralded, an act of both exile and pilgrimage. Gunnar carried with him the scars of the past, but also a newfound clarity born from the Skald's teachings and the fragile peace that had settled over his homeland. His journey was not one of abandonment, but of seeking, a search for redemption, understanding, and perhaps a chance to forge a path beyond the cycles of violence that had long gripped the north. In the evenings, as the village settled into a rhythm of healing and hope, the mead hall often filled with tales, stories told in hushed tones and reverent whispers. The Skald's name was spoken not only as a memory, but as a guiding spirit. His voice, lost to mortal hearing, was said to echo in the rustling of the pines and the distant caws of the ravens that circled the skies. Children of the village, eyes wide with wonder, gathered around fires to hear the elders recount the tale of the blind Skald who challenged a jarl and faced the abyss with nothing but truth as his shield. They spoke of the white wolf's return and the serpent's eternal feast, a riddle that lingered like a shadow at the edge of the world, a reminder of the delicate balance between destruction and renewal. In the quiet moments before dawn, Freya would sometimes step outside the healer's hut, her breath rising in steady plumes beneath the cold stars. She would lift her face to the sky, feeling the weight of the god's silence and the corvid's watchful presence. Though the path ahead remained uncertain, she carried within her a steadfast belief, the power of words, of stories, and of truth to kindle light even in the darkest times. Torvald's legacy was not bound to stone or song alone. It lived in the hearts of those who dared to speak what others silenced, who chose courage over comfort, and whose voices refused to be swallowed by fear. His sacrifice had sown the first shoots of change, a quiet revolution that would ripple through generations. As winter's grip slowly loosened, the land itself seemed to breathe anew. Beneath the frozen earth, life stirred, roots pushing through the frost, streams thawing beneath ice, and the ever-watchful ravens soaring free across the endless horizon. The clans of Ravenholm, once fractured and shadowed by treachery, now stood at the cusp of a new cycle. Bound by the fragile threads of trust and the enduring power of truth, they faced the uncertain dawn together, warriors, healers, elders, and children alike. And somewhere, carried on the cold wind that swept through fjords and forests, the Skald's voice rose once more, a song of lament and hope, whispered only to the gods and the corvids who bore witness. A reminder that even when silenced by men, the truth never truly dies. It waits, patient and eternal, to be heard again. The story was far from over. It had merely turned a page, one inscribed not with blood, but with the quiet courage to speak, to listen, and to believe. And in that belief, the spirit of the Skald lived on. The wind carried a sharp chill through the skeletal branches, whispering secrets that only the trees seemed to understand. The world felt still, suspended in the fragile moment between the fading night and the reluctant dawn. Within the quiet village of Ravenholm, life stirred slowly, as if waking from a long and troubled dream, the echoes of long-held pain mingling with cautious hope. The journey had been arduous, marked by loss and sacrifice, but the heart of the clan beat on, steady, if weary. Torvald Halti's name was no longer whispered in fear or scorn. Instead, it became a quiet song, carried through the crackling fires of hearths where elders recounted his tale. His courage, the blind Skald who dared speak forbidden truths, had become a beacon for those who yearned for a future unshadowed by deceit. Though his sight had long since vanished, his vision had pierced deeper than any flesh-bound eye could see, illuminating the path from darkness into dawn. The runed stone, erected near the great hall's entrance, stood as a solemn sentinel. Its carved symbols bore silent witness to a truth that refused to be buried. The white wolf and the serpent, etched with care and reverence, told a story beyond mere words, one of cycles, of endings and beginnings woven into the fabric of fate itself. People passing by touched the stone gently, fingers tracing the worn grooves, perhaps seeking strength or solace from the memory it held. Within the village, the seasons began to shift. The long, merciless winter that had gripped the land with frozen fingers started to ease its hold. Snow softened, melting into the earth beneath the first tentative rays of sunlight. The forests, dense and ancient, breathed new life as the early signs of spring stirred beneath the frozen ground. It was a time of renewal, fragile yet potent, much like the fragile peace that now threaded its way through the hearts of Ravnholm's people. Sigrid Thorisdottir moved among her people with the quiet strength of a leader forged in exile and fire. Her bearing was resolute, her eyes reflecting the weight of responsibility she bore and the fierce hope she nurtured. The brooch of the white wolf gleamed faintly against the folds of her cloak, a symbol not only of her lineage but of the unbroken spirit she embodied. Each day she tended to the wounds left by betrayal and war, seeking to rebuild what had been shattered. Freya, the healer whose steady hands had mended more than flesh, found her place firmly rooted within the community. Her knowledge of ancient herbs and secret rites breathed life into broken bodies and weary souls alike. The people came to her not only for remedies but for the quiet wisdom she offered, an anchor in the shifting tides of uncertainty. Her bond with Sigrid deepened, intertwined by shared purpose and unspoken understanding, and the memory of the blind Skald who had guided them through the storm. Ira, once a frightened child, now stood tall, a young woman tempered by hardship and carrying the weight of legacy. The silver brooch of the white wolf pinned to her cloak caught the light as she moved through the village, her eyes bright with determination. She sought not only to survive, but to prepare, to train in the old ways and new, ready to face the threats that still lurked beyond the safety of their fragile peace. The lessons of the past lingered like shadows at the edges of every gathering. The tale of the blind Skald's courage and sacrifice was more than legend. It was a living reminder that truth, no matter how fiercely denied or brutally suppressed, held a power beyond mortal reach. His voice, carried now in the sighing wind and the distant caws of ravens, echoed in the hearts of those who dared listen. It spoke of a world where silence could not bind the spirit, where words, once freed, traveled beyond the reach of kings and tyrants. In the hearth-lit halls and beneath the star-heavy skies, stories wove themselves into the fabric of daily life. Elders recounted the vision of the white wolf and the serpent devouring its own venom, a riddle that still stirred the minds of many. It was a symbol of the endless cycle of destruction and renewal, a warning and a promise entwined. Some pondered its meaning in silent reverence, others in quiet dread, but all understood its significance. The end of one era was the beginning of another. The clans beyond Ravnholm watched with wary eyes, whispers traveling on cold winds far and wide. Some saw the shift as a chance to heal old wounds, while others regarded it as a moment to strike, to seize opportunity from the cracks in fragile alliances. The balance of power, delicate and precarious, hung like a blade over northern lands. Yet the courage born of truth had planted seeds that no blade could easily sever. Gunnar Svensson, the warrior once bound by loyalty to a fallen jarl, had walked a solitary path away from the village's warmth. His departure was not an escape, but a pilgrimage, a search for redemption and understanding beyond the tangled web of past loyalties and betrayals. The scars on his face reflected battles fought both without and within, the weight of choice and consequence etched deep. His journey was a silent testament to the possibility of change, even for those burdened by shadow. As twilight descended, Freya often found herself standing at the edge of the forest, her breath rising in steady plumes beneath the cold stars. She lifted her face to the sky, feeling the quiet presence of the god. And so, beneath the endless sky where ravens soared and gods whispered in silence, the spirit of the blind Skald lived on. His lament, carried only by the divine and the corvids, became a testament to the power of truth, unseen but never unheard. In a world where shadows often threatened to swallow light, the courage to speak, to listen, and to believe endured. It was the flame that would guide the clans through storms yet to come, a legacy born not of bloodshed, but of unyielding hope. As the cold wind sighed through the trees, it carried a final whisper, a call to remember, to honor, and to find strength in the stories that bind us across time. For in every ending lies the seed of a beginning, and in every silence, the promise of a voice yet to rise. If this tale stirred something deep within, if it awakened the ember of courage or the hunger for truth, then let it be shared. Let the stories of the Skald and the clans travel far beyond these frozen lands, carried on the wings of ravens and the breath of those who dare to listen. The journey continues, and those who walk it are never truly alone. The gods watch, the ravens soar, and the voice of the Skald sings eternal, an echo of the past, a call to the future. Subscribe, join the circle, and witness the unfolding saga where courage is tested, truths are unveiled, and the human spirit defies even the darkest nights. For in the end, it is not the eyes that see, but the heart that knows, the Skald's truth, forever whispered beyond the reach of men.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.